3 years and 358 days until the effects of climate change threaten to become both permanent and irreversible. Legalizing deep-sea mining offers us a rare chance to power a green revolution and reduce global harm. The choice in this debate isn't between risk and safety. It's between action with promise and inaction with consequences proposed. In this speech, a couple things. 2 notes on framing, our model, and then our first 2 out of 3 substantive arguments. With that framing, first, rare earth minerals are essential components in current and anticipated technology. They're used in almost everything from manufacturing to defense and are especially vital in making components for renewable energy projects. This is magnets for wind turbines or material for photovoltaic cells. I want to note 2 things. A, the current export, refining, and processing of REMs is largely controlled by China. When other countries or companies try to build their own rare earth extraction operations, China responds by temporarily flooding the market and driving competitors out of business. B, the extraction of REMs and in general of metals around the world is enormously environmentally destructive irrespective of how you do it. Conflict-ridden, heavily susceptible to human rights violations. This looks like deforestation and land destruction in China, coups in Myanmar, and control over rare earth minerals and brutal treatment of miners in the DRC. Second, it is estimated that more than 5 times the amount of these elements in the world's land reserves can be found via seabed mining. So far, the ISA has not greenlit any commercial mining, only allowing for limited exploration. We're going to explicitly model the permitting process for deep-sea mining to occur based on currently proposed legal regimes and give you the numbers to ground this. We also think we have some degree of fiat to ensure this happens. We'll acknowledge that these are obviously going to be altered by the ISA to some extent when this happens. First, we're going to allow nationals of every nation to take stake claims on any area of the deep sea floor. The size of these claims for corporate entities will have both an upper and a lower bound. We'll say 5,000 square miles is a maximum and 1,000 at a minimum. Experts estimate that this range contains at least 100 million tons of minerals, more than enough for companies to develop. After registering a claim, the claimant will have exclusive rights to mine in that area for a set time frame. 2, we'll say the aggregate claims of any given nation will be limited, so the total area claimed does not contain more than hundreds of years of reserves of one of the major economic minerals in the nodules. This is manganese, nickel, cobalt, copper, etc. So the US might cap out at less than 5% total area of the Pacific Ocean, although we'd note that less than 10% of that 5% of that 3 million square miles would be sufficient to produce the US's resources. Importantly, the seabed offers such massive resource deposits that countries can mine freely without being forced into competition. Third, there will be provisions such that mining does not interfere with fishing, shipping, communication cables, and vice versa. Fourth and finally, there will be environmentalist standards developed by the ISA along international environmentalists. This includes not mining along fault lines, hydrothermal vent fields, they are more biodiverse or volcanically active waters. Compliance with labor and environmental regulations will be ensured by regular audits and inspections, and improvement in comparison with existing mining operations that are national and have zero international oversight. With that, our first substantive argument is legalizing deep-sea mining accelerates green technology. The premise of this argument is that shortages in REMs have caused the green's energy development to stagnate. It is estimated that demand for REMs is in a net zero scenario would be more than double. Without access to a constant flow of REMs, green technology is both less viable and much more expensive given investors are uncertain about future growth. This means 3 things. First, governments are unwilling to subsidize expensive and uncertain green tech programs. Second, companies that are profit motivated will not make initial capital expenditures given that research, development, and innovation is highly costly. Third, people don't want to buy EVs that are much more expensive than other cars. This is not in their average incentive, so they're unlikely to ever transition unless we make it cheaper. Reducing costs of building green tech is thus essential to achieving large-scale implementation, and legalizing deep-sea mining addresses this by simply increasing the supply of REM minerals. I want to be specific. Experts assess deep-sea mining to be much more cost-effective because 1, pure extraction in the deep sea is cheaper. 2, it is less intense refining is required whenever you get minerals from the seabed. And 3, and this is important, seabed and deep-sea mining are more concentrated deposits or access, meaning you have more valuable claims or you're able to get more resources out of the same geographical space. So we likely access a huge supply of resources in perpetuity. Land sources are running out. To meet the anticipated demands by 2035 for graphite, lithium, nickel, cobalt, analysis projects that 384 new mines would be needed, almost 3 times times more than the number that currently exists. These deposits simply do not exist or are far too inaccessible. Accessing deep-sea mining minerals now is thus crucial. Look. There is a closing window to solve climate change. Action needs to be taken quickly. Any future where a world can overcome climate change is dependent on having enough REMs to propel us through a green transition. Note the gravity of this fact. Faster action on climate change means preventing deadly heat and weather events, natural disasters, outbreaks of resource conflicts, and mass migration. In fact, studies suggest that every 0.1 degree of warming causes 100 million deaths. Any action we take now in an attempt to guarantee a better future for humanity is absolutely essential. Before I move on to our second substantive argument,
BYD's Seagull is already producing cars that do not require these types of batteries. Sodium-ion batteries do not need critical minerals. Why do you need these?
Our argument was about the long-term transition to green technology. Of course, in the short term, if you have some amount of minerals from landmines, then you can do this. But in the long term, if you do not have a stable supply, then it is unlikely you get massive amounts of investment flight into this industry, given it is not sustainable. We told you that the demand would more than double and that you would need 384 new mines, which you do not have access to. The second argument is that legalizing deep-sea mining breaks China's monopoly on rare earth minerals. As we told you in framing, China produces 90% of the world's REMs because of its historically subsidized and market power to bully competitors. What is our counterfactual? On our side of the house, many countries have access to rare earth minerals, and they're able to sustainably develop. I want to emphasize that expanding access to REMs allows new companies to come in that aren't Chinese to mine as well. For example, TMC would likely come in, which is a Canadian company and now grants Canada a unique benefit. Importantly, diversifying supply and access to REMs erodes China's monopoly and decreases global reliance on them. When countries now have direct access to REMs, they are incentivized to build up their own refinement capabilities, promoting a world where each country is more self-sustaining and more stable. China's monopoly is terrible for the world. First, because of supply chain vulnerability, if China does not want to give up deep-sea minerals to another country, then there's straight-up monopoly over these minerals. As a result, other countries who rely on EVs or similar industries are immediately jeopardized. In the mid-2000s and 2010s, China started imposing export quotas on REM since they controlled over 90% of the global supply. Some REM prices rose by over 2,000%. Global shocks like COVID have similar effects. Rare earth prices jumped massively as a result of supply chain shocks. China was pursuing its zero-COVID strategy. Second, it gives China too much leverage over other countries. And China on the international stage is far from a benevolent actor. In fact, to achieve their resource dominance, they have exploited human rights, razed villages, and burnt forests as a result of their dominance. Here's what this leverage looks like. In 2010, China restricted rare earth exports to Japan over a dispute about a fishing trawler. In the status quo, China is placing exports on REMs in response to the US tariffs. And we're talking about politicians openly discussing not defending Taiwan if China attacks for fear of losing access to vital resources. This is especially crucial given the characterization that these minerals are vital to some countries' defense technologies. Missile guidance defense systems, fighter planes, etc. China's ability to exert control over these industries makes it much more able to control how countries develop. Climate change and threats to critical supply chains aren't waiting. Neither should we propose.
Stop.
Thank the first professional speaker for their kind speech, and I'll open the debate for opposition lead by the first speaker.
Is everyone ready? From the desertified agricultural lands of Kazakhstan to the eradicated forests of Chernobyl and the gaping ozone layer above our head, history is littered with botched scientific experiments rushed through in the name of progress. Legalization of deep-sea mining, when we do not know the consequences, will be the next ecological catastrophe waiting to happen. England will not allow it. So what is our stance? As per the wording of the motion, the burden on POP in this debate is to prove that we must legalize deep-sea mining immediately. Notice the majority of their claims is due to the long-term transition in the green transition. We think that as long as we can claim that we get these minerals in sufficient time frame, that argument is framed out of the debate. But on our side, our position is that right now, the technology and research available is insufficient to allow safe and sustainable mining. Instead, we must wait until we are ready. How long that takes depends on the pace of technological process, but we're likely talking about 5 to 10 years, if not more. This buys time for the ISA, but also mining companies, scientists, and researchers. And what happens in this time is crucial. We get primary scientific developments on ecosystem damage and minimization, development of newer drill bits and vacuums to reduce sediment groups, refinement and extractive techniques to minimize heavy metal leaching, and construction of proper regulatory and enforcement frameworks, or to say that when the IC finally implements this, it will be done well and equitably in a sustainable way. With all that being said then, a few direct responses to their case. Firstly, strategically, we just question their burden of immediacy because we don't think they've really dealt with it in this debate. A lot of their proposed benefits are not actually time critical in the way they frame to you. We can easily wait 10 years and co-opt many of their benefits, but without the intermediate harms of poor extraction. For example, the idea of green transition. We think that these minerals already exist because we're not at a point of scarcity. Even with rising demand, we aren't running out of things at least to the next 20 to 40 years. There are still currently huge deposits in China with about 270,000 tons a year reserved of 44 million. Brazil's 21 million tons are still largely untouched, with mining operations only starting in late 2024. Even now, supply outstrips demand. Look at mineral prices. Dow's Porium is down 40% year on year, and neodymium prices have halved overall. That means that all the harms they give you about scarcity, be like with these mines with people going crazy, they're not enhanced necessarily to scarcity, but rather the ones for these minerals. We think that exists on both sides. But additionally, innovation reduces the need for minerals. Solar panels, 70% less silver is needed in solar panels today than there were 5 years ago. I think for all these reasons, demand is still likely to exist on our side. We're still likely to be equitably get a lot of these minerals on both sides of the house. The question then is, when we allow the transition into deep sea mining, we say we can do it later. Next thing then, we question the effectiveness of the types of regulation that they're passing on this side. Because note, the ISA is currently in a position where it can't even force any of the regulations they talk about on setting regulations. The ISA hasn't agreed on regulations after more than 5 years of negotiating, and we simply don't know the consequences, and therefore the regulations we set are likely to be inequitable. That is to say, we don't know how high sediment plumes should be. Should it be 10 meters, 20 meters? We don't know. So effectively on this side, the ISA is shooting in the dark where we get bad regulations. But secondly, on enforcing, mining operations pollute thousands of square kilometers. Our capacity to monitor these are inherently low, and companies have high incentive to flout these regulations, leading to bad consequences on their side. But secondly, the current framework devotes monitoring to countries who licenses these companies that mine in their assigned waters, but preserve their own incentives. That is to say, if you're a small country like Nauru and you have to monitor a big company like the TMC, you won't want to shut them down for polluting too much because of the currency and the money that they give you. In that case, you're likely to support them in the harmful actions that they do. That looks like using modern slavery or manning your ships. It looks like them outright harming the environment on their side. That means that those small countries that they talk about are likely to get exploited on their side. You don't actually benefit them. They hire companies to take advantage of them. With all that being said then, they aren't actually able to effectively pass these regulations, and they are bad in the ways in which they are able to prove their burden of immediacy. We don't think they're winning this debate. First argument then, on environmental harms. Note that 39 countries and counting have already signed a petition calling for the ISA to ban deep sea mining indefinitely. The question is, what are they worried about? 4 things. First, current drills and vacuums designed to physically destroy the ocean floor to access nodules, decimating habitats and killing wildlife. Secondly, sediment disruption literally chokes entire populations of photophila marine life and blocks sunlight from reaching phytoplankton. Thirdly, toxic substances such as mercury and arsenic are released, leading to acidification of oceans and magnification of heavy metals up the food chain. These harms are, as of proposition's current understanding and technology, unavoidable. So there are various impacts which are going to impact them regardless of a development. Firstly, through photosynthesis, phytoplankton is responsible for absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere than all trees and land combined. Secondly, even small changes in ocean pH and oxygen light levels can cause mass dive effects which will cause equivalent harm to the environment as India's entire economy. But secondly, sediment is also a magic carbon store. Disrupting it and acidifying ocean releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And thirdly, deep sea organisms are the first step on the food chain that lead right up to important species for the global food supply, like tuna, cod, and haddock. Crop risks worldwide food instability and drives demand for more ecologically damaging meat sources like beef and pork. Do not let them lie to you and tell you that these organisms do not matter. But fourthly, deep sea life has developed unique biological mechanisms to survive in extreme environments, which can stimulate scientific and medical developments which are crucial for humanity. This isn't just hypothetical. All DNA technology, such as PCR and CRISPR, is dependent on a single enzyme called Taq polymerase, extracted from a bacteria that lives deep in deep sea thermal vents, we would have never discovered these if these weren't extinct on Proposition's world. All this is to say then, that the harm they have in the environment are unignorable, we can't support them. I note, this weighs over a lot of the harm that they give you in various ways. Firstly, on scale, the amount of CO2 released from deep sea mining is extraordinary and overpowers any savings they might make from slightly decreasing electric cars and solar panel. Food instability further impacts populations that are already harmed by climate change. So all those benefits they try to give on the environment are just exacerbated by the extent of deep sea mining. But secondly, on containment, the harms of things like land mining are geographically concentrated and contained, allowing them to be mitigated. But these harms specifically spread across oceans beyond our capacity to control. And thirdly, on uncertainty, more people have been to the moon than have been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. We simply do not know the extent to which these harms can be devastating in the first place. They have to defend unimaginable harms. On strategy, all these harms exist on proposition, but on our side, with 10 more years of research and development, they can be better understood, significantly mitigated, or avoided entirely. A moratorium that allows us this time is crucial. Before I move on then, POI.
How can you be sure you're going to be developing this technology? We've been talking about deep sea mining since the 1970s, 55 years later. We do not have any of the technology that you can talk about. How do you magically ensure it happens?
Firstly, we think that even in our worst case, when we can't get massive technological gain, the fact that we simply know more about the environment means we can mitigate the harms that you talk about to a large extent. But secondly, we think there are massive commercial incentives for this to happen when they know that eventually they can be deep sea mining. We think that on our side, when there's equitable change that is possible, is likely to happen. But second argument then, which furthers this push on how we're likely to get innovation that helps the rest of the world. If proper right and they increase the quality and quantity and reduce the price of rare earth minerals, there are two important industries that are harmed. Firstly, recycling. Recycling only makes sense if the cost of extracting materials is less than buying new ones or throwing stuff into landfills. Pulp makes large-scale recycling plants no longer economically viable as they reduce the scale of the value of the product. Compared to cardboard or glass, we're currently in nascent stages of e-technology and we need time to develop the techniques to make it economically competitive. But secondly, on innovation, ongoing innovation efforts are reducing the need for future rare earth minerals extractions. This was like, instead of lithium, sodium-ion batteries are used in new BYD cars, look at the POI. Secondly, instead of neodymium, iron nitrogen magnets are used in the latest wind turbines. But on prop also makes these future innovations less likely as the cost benefit is skewed and they can never achieve the necessary economies of scale. The impacts of this are crucial because by accelerating the need for deep sea mining, they ultimately reduce the need for innovation and development in the first place, meaning that the harms that they already talk about are going to be exacerbated and they don't get the long-term change which they themselves want to get through the green transition. We proved that we have minerals right now and the green transition can happen eventually. We proved that it happens best equitably on our side when we don't destroy our oceans like they do. For those reasons, side with R.
Opposition says we are taking a risky bet with deep sea mining, but the odds on their side are absolutely insane. They're gonna wait 10 years while people's homes are flooded and destroyed, while climate change grips our entire planet, hoping that scientists will somehow find a way to drill the ocean floor somehow without destroying it. This is the insane bet they are making. We are far more reasonable. Deep sea mining is a necessity, and emergencies require us to take decisive action. I'm going to clear up some things on the model and then talk about two clashes. First, on green technology. Second, on the feasibility of things like supply chains and monopolization, before my last argument about how their side is far worse on the alternative. First, on the model, they talk about the long-term feasibility of these things and then, we're going to do so much research. I will deal with this under my clash about green technology. But the second challenge they have is, the regulation is very hard. It's hard to have people agree. But we told you since first that these draft regulations have existed for years. The ISA has simply not finalized them, and we are very reasonable. All of the things in our model are things that already exist in legal proposals. It is natural that we limit how much each country can get, and we set a cap on how many companies can enter in the first place. All of this was very clear from first. But secondly, I want to explain why we get far better regulation compared to their side. Because on their side of the house, they still do mining to some extent on land, right? Because they themselves agree that they also want to solve climate change. So what is the comparative? First, regulation is better on our side because it is international. We have many countries weighing in on how this should be done, and this prevents corrupt officials in places like Brazil or the Congo exploiting people in order to do mining on their side of the house with zero international oversight. But secondly, the issue on their side is a collective action problem, right? Because if I'm mining in the DRC and the pollution goes into a river and flows into a different country, the negative externalities of mining do not affect me. This is why regulation on their side is very ineffective, because companies are able to outsource the harm. In the ocean, when every person is mining in the same space, everyone takes on the harms of things like pollution. So we have better incentives to actually deal with this, and we have better regulation on our side of the house. First clash then about green technology. I really just think the responses they give here are not very substantial, because they just say, we have some minerals right now, they exist in China and prices are going down. But our argument was quite nuanced. 3 things to note. First, our argument was that investors rely on the long term. It does not matter if right now prices happen to be going down in the moment, because they know that it's going to run out at some point, so they don't put in long-term investment, and you don't get the long-term green tech transition that they want to talk about. But secondly, even if they prove that there is investment right now and it is currently cheap, we told you already in case that this is likely to stagnate, that this is short-term investment on the fact that some reserves exist now, but you don't get the long-term that they agree is necessary. Finally, they have an assertion that they are going to be able to distribute this equitably, but we told you in our second argument that got painfully little engagement that China monopolizes this and chooses who to even give this to in the very first place, so no idea how this goes away on their side of the house. Second big claim they have is, there are a lot of environmental harms and this is quite bad. I just think a lot of these things are asserted. They're just like, we're getting rid of so much biodiversity. Guys, you mine these things in abyssal plains where literally there are no coral reefs or anything you talk about. So I have no idea why they think the risks are so high. But secondly, these things are just overblown. They act as if we are releasing every bit of carbon that is stored in the ocean. This is not the case. The US would literally be mining 10% of 5% of the Pacific Ocean. So the impact is quite small. And secondly, even if the carbon sink on the bottom is somehow disrupted, the vast majority of the ocean's carbon storing capability comes from physical absorption, where cold water absorbs CO2 and it sinks down. And this happens either way, given the water isn't shooting out of the ocean on their side. I think this is just a little bit of fear mongering. Finally, I want to address their weighing on this clash. They say, this is very certain and the ocean spreads around. 2 reasons why environmental degradation is worse on their side. With things like land mining, this is literally where people live. It is not in the middle of the Pacific where we can develop technologies to make this better, but instead you're polluting directly into rivers next to indigenous populations or next to places where people literally live and fish out of these rivers. All of these things are more harmful on their side. Final thing, their assertion that they're going to get better research is simply unfounded, because the only reason you invest in research is if you are actually mining in the very first place. Because the only way you can test anything in the first place is if you are mining to a great extent. Even if they prove their technology works in exploratory contracts with 1% of the ocean, they cannot prove it works across the entire ocean. This is why we need to mine and legalize now, so that companies have the incentive to develop good technologies. That is the only place where it takes place. Second clash I want to talk about is new technology, China, stuff like that. Their claim here takes up 1 minute of their first speech, and it's, recycling and innovation might be good. I will prove that these technologies don't matter, but before that, sure.
Yeah, presumably on your side, China is still the biggest investor and has the most influential power within the ISA. Even if they aren't getting all the deals, getting the most lucrative deals, they're also getting the most companies in these areas, bid for the most cases. You don't think that China loses their monopoly on your side?
This is not the case. China might have influence in the ISA, but we told you that we are going to regulate in a way that is equitable. That is the fiat that side proposition has. But secondly, they miss the nuance of our case that right now the way that China maintains their monopoly is by using the fact that they control supply to flood the market and outcompete competitors. If supply exists and is very abundant, this is impossible because prices go down and the market cannot be flooded in the very first place. Their argument about innovation does not make much sense. They're like, sodium ion batteries. Guys, the reason nobody has ever heard of this in this round here is because it is literally infeasible. Not a single country has invested in it yet, clearly because it is too expensive and it's some sort of startup they found on the internet. But secondly, they say recycling is going to be very good. But this incentive exists on either side of the house because even if we have more supply, there's an incentive to use it responsibly. So I think this is symmetric and they don't even prove why these technologies are so important compared to the threat of climate change. Our argument about China was very simple, that on our side, we reduce things like supply chain vulnerabilities and leverage that make it so that these countries can't even develop technology on their side of the house. This argument got far little engagement from them. With that, final argument about how their side is far worse because they have to landmine. I want to be clear. Opposition also wants to do deep sea, also wants to do rare earth mineral mining. They just do it in a far worse way. Firstly, on the environment, I already explained to you that regulation is far less effective on their side of the house, but also this happens in far more sensitive regions. It is rural environments in China that have been absolutely destroyed by the mining industry, or ecologically fragile regions like rainforests in the Congo Basin, Myanmar, and parts of South Africa. The reason why this outweighs is they can talk about risk all they want, but these harms are certain. Entire indigenous communities suffering from pollution on their side of the house as companies that are regulated by corrupt officials absolutely raze their land. Second harm, though, their side of the house on land mining exacerbates human rights abuses and conflict. More than 1 million children are engaged in child labor in places like cobalt mines in the DRC. Entire wars are fought over control over these critical minerals in places like the Congo. On our side, war is less likely because cobalt is cheap. There's no reason to fight wars over it. And also, in the ocean, it's much harder to fight in the first place, and we already told you that there are so many resources in the ocean that there's no need to fight at all. This is crucial. Note how horrific their status quo is. Not only are they lagging behind on climate change, but cobalt mines are sites of exploitation, injury, and death. These children work with bare hands for pennies a day, and the conflicts surrounding them devastate communities and entire nations for generations. Deep sea mining might have uncertain risks, but if we let go of this chance, you're ignoring decades of certain history, of war, of exploitation, of rising temperatures that threaten every person on this world. For these reasons, propose.
The second proposition speaker for the speech, and now to continue the debate for the opposition.
Thank you.
Here.
A 1989 deep-sea mining trial in the Clarion-Clipperton zone decimated a tract of the seafloor. 30 years later, it was still barren and desolate, and crucially, we have no idea why. They are gambling with our future. I know we're staying in a casino, but don't let them do this with our environment. A few parts of this speech. Firstly, on immediacy, next on the environment, and thirdly, on the green transition. Firstly, I want to point out that they never met their burden as to why we need to do this now. Their analysis is, we're hitting a tipping point for carbon in the next 3 years. The problem is green technology only reduces carbon in the long run because it's so carbon intensive to produce. If this is true, releasing numerous tracts of carbon because you're upturning the seafloor, it's not cold water, it's literally the soil that contains all the carbon. We tell you it's this literal size of India's economy, the entire, each year that's being produced if you do this. This outweighs them in the short run because you hit the tipping point on their side when you release so much carbon. They never explain why you need to do this now rather than waiting 10 years where we have safer technology, we have regulations that are implemented, we understand how to monitor the environmental harms. They never meet their burden in this debate. First clash and most important clash on the environment. There are two things we say here. The first is that regulations are not ready. They counter-assert, guys, they've been ready for years, but no, they missed the 2023 deadline. They're still trying to negotiate. They are not ready. What happens is TMC lobbies them on your side, and they do not get sufficient regulations. But more importantly, the technology is not ready. They tried to say, will the technology be ready on your side? It's been 55 years. No, because after 10 years at least more, with a rapid rate of progress we see in the status quo, we are seeing more testing of how this mining works. They claim you can only test mining mining if you have it legalized. This is absolutely false. We can have exploratory contracts, but crucially, not ones that are done by TMC. Right now, the only contracts and the only tests they have were done by these companies, which means inherently they're obviously going to try to have a perverse incentive to mitigate the harms that are actually occurring. We get actual regulations. We get actual developments of technology. This is not speculative. It's like vacuums instead of drills, which only hoover up the nodules rather than drilling the seafloor. This is pump and riser systems that distribute the sediment far deeper in the ocean so it doesn't damage fish. These are the things we stand for. You never get them on your side. They say, we'll regulate this out because you can't mine in volcanic areas and there are no coral reefs on your side. Guys, our case was not about volcanic areas. The harms occur everywhere. The filter feeders that are all the way around the Clarion-Clipperton Zone all get killed on your side of the house. The fact that literally there are 5,000 species in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, 92% were new to science. They eradicate all of them. When they kill them through the drilling, they kill them by the sediment plumes. What do they then say? They say, guys, land mining is much worse. I want to flip this. Land mining, as per their own analysis, is likely to be a supplement for deep sea mining. They're going to do both on their side of the house. They say demand is so high. If that's the case and they want to increase supply, obviously you'll do both. So it's the comparative they have to defend is both instead of only one. I want to flip this even more though. By producing a greater supply, you decrease the market price for the land mining. At that point, all the land mines in the DRC have to cut costs as much as possible so they don't wear protective equipment, they don't follow environmental standards because they have to maintain their profit margins. They also lose the retained profits to invest in better forms of land mining because you have less profit because the price goes down. Suddenly you're using cheap explosives to mine rather than precision drills. We flip their argument into the abyss. They claim then, guys, don't worry, mining in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone is fine because it's a common place, so you don't want to pollute it. It's the exact opposite. If you're mining in your own country, the river isn't going to leak into another area. At that point, you have an incentive to mitigate the damages. On your side, when you're mining in a common area, you have a tragedy of the commons where you race to the bottom and you mine as much as possible and don't care because you're polluting someone else's tract. The implication is, on their side of the house, they're clearly losing the environment. The weighing is, they disrupt filter feeders, they disrupt entire ecosystems and food chains that millions of people and fishing communities are dependent on. They kill species that are new to science, that have ridiculous different prospects. We tell you about TAC polymerase, they never engage. We tell you about all the carbon that's released. They clearly care about emissions. For that reason, literally killing all the phytoplankton, which absorb 25% of CO2, eradicating all the carbon stored in these sediments, literally loses them the case immediately because they concede they do the weighing for us. Next, let's talk about China. Their case here is China controls the refining. Yes, we agree, China controls refining, not supply. They aren't increasing refining on their side of the house, they're just increasing more supply. We can also build more refining in the US. The US has an incentive to increase refining because it wants to decrease dependence. But here's the flip. China controls the ISA on your side of the house, so we haven't engaged in sufficient negotiations. Right now, China is literally creating all the exploration contracts. Look at the training facilities in Qingdao. Look at how all the exploratory contracts that China has. It has 3 compared to everyone else who has none in the status quo. China is controlling the ISA effectively. It's bankrolling it. China also controls on your side of the house. They say a feeble response, guys, we have fiat. Yes, you have fiat to legalize it. You don't have fiat to say that China isn't going to control it in the long run and manipulate this. We flip that on your side of the house. The more important final response is Australia and Japan have large reserves. Their analysis is that China will undercut prices, but clearly they'll have to do this consistently to stop new mines from springing up. This is fine. It proves low prices in the long run. Next, let's talk about innovation. Their analysis here is that you need minerals for the green transition. I'd point out how we have sufficient reserves until 2035. Their thing on 384 new mines was completely invented. The IEA says we have a 5% surplus of these rare earth minerals by 2035. They never proved immediacy. This was the burden that they had to defend. The second more important point is on innovation. Before I go on, yes?
Fishing communities are set to be literally sinking into the ocean within 5 years. Are you really going to tell them that their island is now in the ocean because you are afraid of the fish?
And you absolutely make it worse when you release all the carbon. Green transitions take 20 years to have impacts because you literally need to be using the green cars for 20 years to have any margin. You're losing this debate. On innovation, more important response. They say, no one has heard of a sodium-ion battery. I think this is patronizing. They just haven't done their research. Clearly, Seagull, BYD Seagull, is already using this battery. Lithium phosphate batteries already account for half of global sales. They aren't just unheard of. It's not speculative. They already exist. They can innovate this more. more. They say there's an incentive to innovate on either side of the house, but this is the analysis we give you. We only innovate to mitigate the need for any of these minerals at all when the price is high, at which point you incentivize investors to do this. Here's where I analytically stand on my first speaker and explain even more why only we get innovation. What here we say is that there's path dependency, first layer to this argument. What happens is once deep sea mining begins, it will constrain the utilization of superior options in the future. There are 3 reasons. A, capital lock-in. Deep sea mining requires massive upfront investment in specialized ships, robotic mining equipment, and processing facilities. Once built, there's a strong incentive to keep on using them to recoup costs. Secondly, supply chain entrenchment. Companies will build logistics and commercial and redistribution networks around deep sea mining source materials, and these networks create sunk costs, making it harder to switch to recycled or land-based alternatives in the future. C, on political and legal commitments. Governments that support deep sea mining may sign long-term contracts, offer subsidies, or create legal frameworks that entrench the industry. This is especially likely due to ambitious states wanting to secure the best commercial venture partners to gain influence in deep sea mining supply chains. This makes it politically difficult to pivot away, even if public opinion or science shifts. Second layer on crowding out alternatives. The only reason we have any innovations in the status quo that aren't speculative, they already exist in the space, is because resources and will is allocated towards production efficiency due to constraints in supply. If DSM floods the market with supply as prop claims, all this incentive vanishes for any innovation. This means that recycling initiatives become unprofitable because recycled material cost is too low. It means like ESG funds and EV CEOs can be complacent because they can point to deep sea mining as being sustainable so they can whitewash themselves and not do anything else. The reason this matters is because only on our side do we get innovation in recycling that reduces the need for these minerals in the first place. We cannot let them shoot in the dark in an environment that is untracked. Their harms will be permanent. Stand for England.
The second opposition speaker for their next speech, and now we have the debate for the proposition made by the first speaker.
Opposition's stance in this round has become incredibly shaky because we've been thinking about deep sea mining for almost 70 years now, and all the technology that they want to talk about has not occurred. They emphasize the importance of addressing climate change and that rare earth minerals are good for green technology, but at the very same time, they're willing to wait only 10 years. What research is likely to be done in 10 years that isn't likely to be done now? When you tell us that we know nothing right now and this damage is unavoidable, that is their side of the house. Because when they concede to, they're likely to do deep sea mining in the long run. That is the absolute worst fate. Because remember what a news tells you. For every 0.1 degree of warming, 100 million people die. Climate change is not an issue that we can push off for 10 years when oceans are flooding, when people are no longer able to have crops to survive anymore. If they wanted to deal with climate change, they were the worst world of all. Their rhetoric is the excuse that holds society back and no longer advances the climate change solutions that we need in order to protect our Earth. They wait far too long in order to fix an issue that is going to destroy our entire Earth. 2 things on framing before 2 clashes. On framing, first, I want to talk about fiat. We have told you down the bench that we are likely to do this model because it is already proposed, these things have been talked about. But second, they tell you even if China does get involved with this, they haven't told you why this model is bad. They haven't told you why perhaps these millions and millions of tons are going to cause competition when we regulate it properly. There's so many minerals and high concentration on the ocean bed, they're unclear as to why there's going to be competition when there's so much of it. Second, lobbying is symmetrical on their side of the house as well. So if it happens on ours, it is probably a worse form on their side because they don't establish any regulation. They just keep pushing it off for a very long term. Perhaps the people that rush in on their side are the ones that are the most pernicious. At least we establish a model in the short term that is good. First clash I want to talk about is green technology and innovation. And I think I already told you the urgency of climate change, but I'm going to repeat it. Waiting 10 years is exactly what's going to end our Earth, because the tipping point is coming fast. If we do not invest in solutions right now, that is when our Earth is no longer going to be recoverable. What was our very nuanced claim that they still haven't engaged with 60 minutes of opposition bench? It was not simply that rare earth minerals don't exist, it's that when investors predict that there are going to be shortages in the future, they're unlikely to invest. Because think about it, if you have a very limited amount of capital right now and you're trying to see which projects are most viable, you are not going to pick the one where there's literally no deep sea mine, there's no rare earth minerals to invest in the future. If you want to do green technology in the long term, you need to know that there's supply. Development and innovation is going to take time on either side of the house, but on their side, it is not worth it if rare earth minerals run out by the time that you are ready. You are unlikely to invest in innovation. This is why we mitigate a bunch of their second substantive argument about innovation, because even if we do get supply right now, as their claim says, long term we think it will return because more people are going to flood into the market. It's very profitable. For example, new startups who perhaps don't have that much money right now can now enter the market and innovate as well. Their side of the house does not get this research and development that they claim. Why is this research and innovation so important? Because in order to transition, you need two things. First, cheap prices, which we think that we've established very broadly because we get a massive supply of rare earth minerals. Second, you need investor buy-in. Investors actively opt out on their side of the house when they see that rare earth minerals are likely to run out. When mines no longer exist, what incentive do you even have? What profit returns can you get if your company is likely to be destitute when you don't have any rare earth minerals to innovate on? We told you that demand for neodymium, something that is very essential to batteries, will outpace demand by 250% by 2030. Their side of the house ruins all of these investments that we are talking right now. The innovation that they think is so good, these lithium batteries that you need, no longer occur on their side of the house. Why was this important then? Because climate change is going to wreck our Earth. The decision you need to make as a judge is whether you want to wait 10 years for perhaps some technology that is going to magically fix the way that we mine, or if you're going to let these people continuing to die in the Congo, for example, because of all of this climate change. What was their first substantive argument about environmental harm? They told you they were going to damage ecosystems because of death of species and acidification. Two things. First, I do not think that we damage the seafloor as bad as they try to fearmonger you into. Their stat is about how much carbon is in the ocean as a whole, not how much carbon we are likely to release if we mine. They need to be much more clear on this. But even if this was true, you only develop better technology on our side of the house, as we told you. If investors see no return, if they don't think that legalization is ever going to happen in the short run, they're not going to invest in safer technology. But second, even if they do it as they claim in their model in 10 years, this harm is non-unique. They have not proven what research is likely to materialize, what things are happening right now, how you're not going to disrupt all these harms that they call unavoidable in their first opposition speech. Waiting does nothing but delay the green transition, which is essential for climate change. Even further, even if you could wait and delay to do some research, the problem is you don't actually know the effects unless you do it on the long run, right? Like we can theorize, for example, about sending a rocket into space, but we don't know the effects until we actually send the rocket. You need to do this green energy. You need to do this deep sea mining as soon as possible. Third step we offer to you is about how land mining is going to be far worse on their side of the house. What were their responses? First, you're likely to do both. We think this was already preempted in our sub. We told you that prices drop, so it's unprofitable to do both, so you don't do land mining anymore. Also, they tell you that these kids lose safety equipment. These kids don't have safety equipment at all. Do you think that they're working with really nice hard hats? No, they're pushing these kids into the mines to make them work and make them do all these mining. That is their side of the house when you push land mining. Because if it is true that they want to do green technology, they get the worst and most pernicious harm. I want to weigh why the environment is worse on their side. First, uncertainty. We don't know the effects of deep sea mining. Perhaps it is not as bad as they want to say, but we know that land mining is damaging to the communities around it. We know that soil erosion happens and people cannot feed their families. Second, on proximity. All of this happens way closer to people who are living when you mine right next to their homes. Second, we know that human rights abuses and war on our side when we allocate these spaces equally. That is when you genuinely don't have conflict. I'll take you.
There's a race to the top among investors and technology on our side of the house so that deep sea mining can become legalized in the future. That's why we develop better technology.
Wait.
So that it's
No investors get involved if they don't think that you are likely to get these rare earth minerals at all. Rare earth minerals aren't likely to happen on your side. You're taking a very wishy-washy stance. You want to say you're going to do it very long term, but you do it in 10 years, so you're likely to accrue the exact same harms that you criticize our side for. Second clash I want to talk about is Chinese monopoly. We told you two broad claims under here that we don't think they engage with properly. First, there's a massive supply chain vulnerability on their side of the house. So if rare earth minerals were so important, they don't even get the best form of it because China entirely holds it. So for when they shut down for COVID lockdown, the supply of rare earth minerals massively dropped in the short term. But second, you give huge amounts of leverage to China, and this has gone completely unresponded to by their side of the house. When China arrested Japanese fishing boats, they held Japanese industries hostage by not giving them rare earth minerals. What do they tell you? Essentially, first, that only China refines. This is absolutely not true. China also does have a supply. Second, the US has an incentive to do this. Yes, but imagine how much bigger the incentive is on our side. Third and finally, they tell you on our model that China does need these negotiations, so they're unlikely to be competitive. This is absolutely so uncharitable. What if we told you down the bench is that our model is likely to work because of fiat, but also because it is just very reasonable. Think about how many rare earth minerals are on the bottom of the ocean, how big the seafloor is, and how concentrated these minerals are. There's unlikely to be competition because you have so many. We can allocate these things properly so China no longer has a monopoly. We think this is very, very bad. China does not deserve more leverage over a key industry that is likely to shape how we interact with climate change in the long run. Their side is the worst harm. Remember, investors have no reason to invest on their side if they don't see any future supply. They damn our world to continuous warming without any solution. Vote for proposition.
Top of the speech, I want to begin with some notes on the regulation and the nature of what they're likely to have to defend on their side of the house. Because they keep saying this idea that, oh look, the ISA already has amazing forms of regulation. But right now, the definitions of what serious harm is or effective protection is are specifically ambiguous within the ISA. They rely on things like the spirit of the legislation in order for you to impose any meaningful impositions on their side of the house. The ISA does not have the technical knowledge to actually implement effective regulations. Because think about it, you can't regulate nuclear energy without knowing what radiation is. You have to first understand the technical risks that come as a result of this in order for you to actually make meaningful regulation in the first place. But the second thing to flag here, and we need a debate on statutory interpretation, on their side of the house, who does the ISA go to ask what effective protection might look like? It's probably going to be the companies with technical expertise who have an incentive to kind of define these words in a way that is effective for them, in a way that is meaningful for them. So when they ask us, when they ask us what we're going to do with the time, we say we're going to use the time to identify the technical areas that are important. We're going to have things like explicit regulation and exploratory contracts to actually recognize what these regulations need to look like and how they need to be effective. They talk about provisions to have marine life in their P1 setup. We don't know what these provisions are under their side of the house. We can only figure out what they are on our side. But the second thing that I want to flag within this framing clash is the question of immediacy. Because they keep saying we can't get development in 10 years, we can't do these things in 10 years. The first thing to flag is obviously they're clearly worse on this metric. Because on their side, and this is actually really important, the only things that have been done are exploratory contracts. The biggest test is a couple of 100 hours in the deep sea, so we don't know whether these things are going to work at scale at all on their side of the house. And so in order for them to actually get all of their environmental benefits, they have to prove this burden, which they don't. We think that we can get better technology in the next 10 years. But secondly, we think that regardless of whether we get better technology or not, we definitely get better regulation, which means that we prevent the worst harms that we care about meaningfully on our side of the house. The second thing that they say on this clash is, oh, these areas are really big. big and we're just going to allocate them magically. The first thing is it's just completely tense with their own case, because they also say that individual countries are going to uniquely go to small areas, but this just doesn't make sense. But the second thing to flag, and this is really important, that these areas might be big, but the distribution of resources is different. So for example, sulfide is mainly found in the Indian Ocean, whereas there are resources like lithium in the CCZ, which means that different companies want to go to different areas based on what is more profitable for them to do. This means that there will definitely be competition, and we think that China here is a major incentive to actually go into this. And I want to just take out their China point over here, because what I need to flag is that China has a massive advantage when it comes to deep sea mining. They've been invested in this technology since the start of the ISA. They literally bankroll them, but additionally they have 3 major DSM companies within their area that each operate independently. They've got the most exploratory contracts. They have a massive head start. If they cared about China's influence, we think it is on their side that they completely entrench this. On our side, they keep saying that China only has the resources, but we tell you that there are supplies in places like Bolivia where there are new rare earth resources coming up. We think that on these cases, not only can we get refining on our side, but we can also extend the which we have supply in different areas. So at the end of this section of my speech, let's be very clear. Not only have I taken out their China point, but I've also shown you why regulation can only happen effectively on our side of the house. With that being said, yeah.
Your entire case is tense. You say that lobbying happens on our side of the house, but if these are the most prominent actors, then it also happens on your side of the house.
Yeah,
these
so
are the people doing research.
let's talk about land mining. Let's talk about the kinds of things that are harmful lobbying that happen on your side of the house. Because the point is, at least on our side, you give the ISA as a body time to develop, and on your side, it's certain that the only kinds of provision that you get are going to be completely influenced by these companies. With that being said, let's talk about the environment. And what I want to note is their major mechanism on like the limitation of long-term investment, because investors don't know what's going to happen in the future. They won't invest unless they're certain of having lots of minerals. What I want to flag is this is exactly our point, because the crucial thing to recognize is that the incentive for green technology exists on both sides of the house. Investors want to develop things like new batteries, things like this, because the fact that it's probably better for them, for example, to have these sources independent of this debate. Because green technology is good for commercial reasons, right? It means that you have limited reliance on things like oil, which might run out. You want to develop more sustainable sources and things like this. So the reason this is important is on your side, when long-term investors don't know whether or not they have minerals in the future, that's when they're forced to invest in things like recycling technology. That's when they're forced to invest in things like innovation. This is a complete flip, and it's very devastating that their 3 decides to hinge their own case on this. The reason this is important, and this is crucial, is because even if they are able to get more minerals in the market, they are actually going to harm the most vulnerable communities that they care about the most. Because as we flagged to you in first, having more minerals without recycling ponds means that e-waste comes up on the shores of Accra, Ghana, where it becomes devastating for the kids who have to suffer from things like cobalt mining. Even if they are able to get recycling later, which we don't think they are, because they never respond to Adrian's split as to why recycling literally doesn't happen. He gives you like 3 different reasons. We think that on their side, recycling might happen later, but the time lag means that by the time you have recycling ponds, you already have millions of tons of e-waste coming on the shores of Ghana, which is devastating them. I want to weigh this against the claim on land mining and the harms that land mining has, because independent of land mining, which is a harm that we already know we can regulate, and Adrian literally flips to you, we still think that the harm that they get of things like harmful e-waste is devastating on their side of the house. The second strand of the environmental clash is the ability for you to solve climate change in these particular capacities. And I want to note how hyperbolic their case is, because they just say, oh, we get more green technology, but the point is that you can't fix the fisheries who are drowning by having slightly cheaper Teslas. It's unclear to me, and they don't actually mechanize this, why it is the case that specifically access to things like lithium is going to fix the extent to which the problems that they themselves highlight. But the second thing I want to flag is the simple lack of analysis that they give here, because the only thing they say is the deposits are more concentrated. But as we say, it's not that simple, because there are different areas in which you have to access things. We think that the technology isn't developed, so you probably can't solve that issue very clearly. But finally, I want to flag on this clash very simply that it's only on our side of the house, when you have effective means to actually get these forms of technology, that you can deal with the growing transition. When FIRST says all they care about is the long-term benefits, we think that we can very much access those long-term benefits on our side of the house. You just have to wait, you have to get the technology to be there, and in our world you have more innovation, more recycling, which is actually meaningful. It's for the very mechanism that their third pivots to, because the fact that investors want green technology but cannot guarantee certain investment because of the fact that this technology might not be available if DSM doesn't work. That's why they invest in recycling and innovation. This is what we think is very beneficial. Finally then, let's just talk about land mining and let's completely flip this out of the debate. Because as Adrian flags to already, the point is that on their side of the house, the incentive for land mining already exists, which is to say that the same reasons that they give means that the people are likely to have worse conditions in these land mines. The best response that their third gives is they already don't have anything, they're already at rock bottom. But I think this is very clearly not true. It means that individuals on their side of the house need to mine in more harsh conditions. It means that they need to go deeper into mines which already exist, have harsher conditions, and they say that any limited environmental protections don't exist. But on our side, on their side, you don't use precision drills, you instead use explosives. We think the extent to which land mining happens on their side is far worse. They had to deal with this flip, and they didn't. But the second thing to note on this is just simply on their point on exacerbating war and the human right violations of land mining. Again, not only do these things happen worse on their side because of the flip that Adrian flags, but secondly, and more importantly, we think that we're actually able to have this worse on their side. Because think about it, modern slavery is rife on equivalent places. In marine fisheries and offshore oil rigs, we think that these are the places when you're in the international waters, you can't actually ever get any meaningful form of regulation. It's in these places where modern slavery is rife. Because sure, it might be a robot that takes the nodule and takes it up to the ship, but from the ship to everywhere else, you still need people working on these places, and we think these are the people who are going to suffer the most on your side. So we think that on this clash, we completely flip them. At the end of this debate, let's be very clear. It is only on opposition that we give you a meaningful way to create the kinds of investment in the long run that allow you to get a better form of green technology development. We think that we're very proud to be on this side.
We thank the third opposition speaker for their fine speech, and now to begin the summary part of the debate, we will first have the call of the opposition. Once again.
Proposition says we're going to hit a tipping point in 3 years. The problem is we have sufficient supplies of rare earth minerals for the next 10 years. The crucial part of our case is they never met the burden of immediacy. We say we're very happy to wait 10 years or longer until the technology is ready so that regulations can be developed, so that technology can develop. They destroy the environment, they're shooting in the dark, they don't even know what impacts there are. We don't know why that deep sea tract never recovered, but we do know that it never recovered and it was still barren after 30 years. Few things in the speech. Firstly, do we need this now? Secondly, do they need minerals for the green transition? And thirdly, on the environment, the most important clash. So firstly, do we need this now? They never met their burden, and they asserted down the bench that regulations were ready, that they could do this, they had sufficient exploratory contracts. The problem was, all the tests that have happened in the status quo were done with private corporations such as the metals company. We do not have sufficient testing to know how to solve these harms. We don't have the technology to regulate. Only on our side, when we wait, can we actually test to see how the impacts occur, how we can mitigate them. We'll do more exploratory contracts. This is efficient. But also on the tech being developed. Right now, their technology destroys the ocean floor, and we have no ability to solve this. Their responses are very feeble. They say, what technology is going to be developed in 10 years? Like, guys, we're at a pace of more rapid development of technology than ever. 10 years ago, I hadn't even heard of generative AI. We're facing loads of developments. Now is a crucial period. They say there's no incentive to invest in technology, but clearly there is. We flagged to you down the bench that only is on our side is there a race to the top to invest in the most safe technology so that deep sea mining can be legalized in the long run. This is why only on our side does TMC have to bid up with better technologies and better regulations so that it can be legalized. We get the technology, pump and riser systems that actually distribute sediment on the floor, vacuums instead of drills. This is very crucial. Next, on minerals and the green transition. They keep on telling you that you have 3 years till the tipping point. The problem is, green technology, as we flagged to you, only makes a net positive after 20 years because the cost of making it, and then you need to wait 20 years of using it till it outweighs the oil car that you're using. So they never even prove their benefits. But more importantly, we have sufficient reserves until 2035. We only want to legalize supply after then. They say that you don't, they flip their case and say, it's not about availability, it's about investment, about the future prospects. The problem is, on our side, they will invest because there's sufficient supply, and you probably know deep sea mining is being legalized in the long run. But more importantly, the flip that they never engage with, my third argument, it was present in first as well on a different level. You get innovation and investment on our side into better alternatives, sodium-ion batteries that aren't speculative, that already exist, more efficiency, permanent magnets that don't use neodymium. This is already in development. We've already had numerous pilot tests. We get more innovation. Only on your side, when the price is high, do you have no incentive to invest. Why would you put down 20 million in a lithium recycling startup if you know you can get lithium for dirt cheap? We get the investment into this green technology that's safer and better for the environment. We win this debate. Most important clash then on the environment. They try to come back and say that land mines are worse, but they never respond to my flip. We say you'll do both on either side. They say, no, you won't do both because the price goes down. But land mining will always be cheap. The DRC miner has no access to deep sea mining. Obviously, you're going to do both land mining and deep sea mining. It gets worse on their side, and they never engage with this flip either. Right now, you're using like precision drills because you have some degree of profit. Right now, yes, maybe they don't have a sufficient helmets, but they may have gloves. They may not have incredibly long working hours. On your side, you force them to constrain their profit margins. You have no ability to invest in better technologies like precision drills, use explosives. We flip them out of this debate. But our case was much more important than they never dealt with it. We tell you about the carbon sequestration that you're unearthing when you do deep sea mining. Their only response is, your stat was about the whole ocean, not about the amount that's uncovered. No, it wasn't. Check the IEA. We say you will unleash numerous tracts of carbon. This outweighs all their impacts in the short and long run. But more importantly, you destabilize entire food chains. The food chains that are reliant on the rest of the ocean, the fact that fishing communities, innovation, all rely on this. They're shooting in the dark. Do not let them gamble with our future. Vote for England.
Thank the opposition for their final reply speech, and now to conclude the inquiry, we would like to call on the proposition reply speaker.
Sorry. I want to be very clear. Opposition cops every single one of our harms after 10 years. They are going to be using modern slavery on these ships, etc. I have no idea why the ISA becomes better at regulating within 10 years, if lobbying is so strong, if it is China, etc. So all their offense had to come from this 10-year time period. We're going to be saving the world for the next 100. First clash I want to defeat from them is about immediacy. On their side, I want to be clear, the incentive for innovation dies after 10 years when you start doing deep sea mining. Every single one of their harms starts. So 4 reasons why these 10 years don't matter. First, 50 years ago, we did that thing to the one place, and we still don't know what happened. So I have no idea why in the next 10 years we're making breakthroughs. But secondly, there's no incentive to do research. Why do you invest millions in R&D if you don't know when it's going to be legalized in 5 years, in 6 years? How do you sell that to a shareholder? How does an investor even plan that project in the first place? It is just so unfeasible. Thirdly, on capacity, because even if they manage to test it and it works on the 0.1% they want to talk about, how do they know it's going to work across all the mining that they eventually do in 10 years? So this doesn't seem to actually solve. And finally, lobbying is symmetric. All of these things are symmetric. China still has influence in the ISA on their side, and they haven't even proven why that's bad. With that taken out, I think their offense is incredibly marginal, because all of their benefits are hung on getting some better research miraculously within 10 years. We told you this is very, very unlikely. First place that proposition is winning is green tech. It might be true that green technology is a 10-year project, but that is exactly why we need to start it right now. If we wait 10 years and it's 10 years on top of that, we are definitely absolutely destroyed. What did we tell you? Investors can only invest when there's a plan for the future, and right now supply is limited. They're like, we have reserves for 3 years. Yeah, in 3 years I'm gonna be in college. You're telling me that we're gonna be cooked in 3 years? This is not very good. Investors need to know that there's going to be a sufficient supply into the long run. That only happens when we open up the sea. That has 5 times more than anything that exists on land in the very first place. This was the only way to solve. We told you this was crucial. This is things like electric vehicles, not only that, but also solar panels, batteries that we use for every single piece of green technology that exists. This was the only way to solve. Their responses are twofold. First, they say innovation. I don't see why this matters. What does recycling do? They never prove the impact. And recycling goes away in 10 years on their side too if they also legalize deep sea mining. Second thing, they say, you destroy the ocean floor. I'm willing to be reasonable. The ocean floor probably gets kind of messed up to some extent, but we gave you the weighing from the very beginning that this is able to be regulated far better by an international body compared to the environmental harms on their side that are regulated by corrupt officials in Brazil or the Congo with zero oversight, and the fact that our harms and land mining are far more proximate. It is literally right next to where you live, right next to the water source where you try to bathe your children. All these things are far worse on their side. First clash then, I think that goes to side proposition. Second clash on China. Their thing is just like, okay, the China is big in the ISA, but from the very beginning, our model was very reasonable. Even if China monopolizes the entire portion that we're going to give to them, it's 5% of the entire ocean. So every country still has enough to go around, so there's no harm to this. On their side, however, China is a belligerent actor that does cutoffs to even their biggest importer like Japan. They do cutoffs over geopolitical fights that mean that they have no equitable access on their side of the house and they're unable to do the transition. Final thing I want to talk about is the alternative. I want to be very clear. We told you from the one, land mining is not very efficient, so they need high prices in order for this to be profitable. But both sides agree that prices go down when we do deep sea mining, and it is difficult to sustain your child labor project if the prices are very low and you're not even making a profit. This is our benefit. That on their side, there is no reason to fight wars over cobalt because cobalt is very cheap. There is no reason to do expensive land mining or try to do all the exploitative things that happen in the status quo. And if you could just invest into a deep sea mining company and make money anyways. The harm was very, very clear. Right now, oceans are rising, people are being exploited, and entire wars are being fought. They are the one taking a gamble. We know what is the problem, only side proposition has the solution. So proud to propose.